Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Friday. This was originally meant to be some news stories from Monday to Thursday, but I only got to Wednesday because something happened that overshadowed everything else, as you guys will all know. But yep, hello, welcome to WIVO. This is a channel where I talk about current affairs, history, politics, news and things like that. If that's your cup of tea, which I assume it is because you're here, just consider clicking subscribe and hitting the bell so you know the next time I make a video. But other than that, let's just get down to it. On Monday, Boris Johnson announced a third national lockdown. In contrast to the second lockdown in England, this time all primary and secondary education would be shut. Some people saw this as a U-turn from the Prime Minister because just a day before he'd said that he had no doubt that schools were absolutely safe. However, he clarified in his address
that the problem is not that schools are unsafe for children. Children are still very unlikely to be severely affected by even the new variant of COVID. The problem is that schools may nonetheless act as vectors for transmission, causing the virus to spread between households.
The Prime Minister said that hospitals were under more pressure than at any other point in the pandemic, and that while there is hope at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines, the new strain is 50 to 70% more infectious than the last one, meaning that the NHS could soon be overwhelmed. I've written a story on the new WIVOJO Instagram page which goes into the schools debate in more detail. There's a link in the description if you're interested. On Tuesday, the Democrats won both of Georgia's seats in the US Senate. Wasn't the US election back in November? Well, yes it was, but in the state of Georgia, if you're a Senate candidate, you need to get over 50% of the votes to win. None of the candidates got that, and so it went to a runoff. It's pretty unusual for both seats to be up for re-election at the same time as well. But what happened here was you had your standard scheduled election and then you had a special election because the Senator of Georgia resigned in 2019 and was replaced with the interim Kelly Loeffler. However, this does mean that Raphael Warnock, the winner of that race, will have to be re-elected again in 2022, which I can only imagine means that the poor man is going to be exhausted. The results mean that Democrats have control of the Senate with a 50-50 tie that can be broken by Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Now, this made the races of national importance and they were the most expensive in US history, and it also meant that the two sets of candidates pretty much campaigned along party lines. The Republicans said that they were a firewall against socialism, and the Democrats looked to implement Biden's policy agenda, which Georgians had voted for in November. The state hasn't had a Democratic senator since 2005, but it has been turning steadily blue since Stacey Abrams' New Georgia campaign, which has been turning out the black vote in Georgia. But there's also an argument that rather than it being Biden and Abrams who won the Senate seats, it was Donald Trump who lost them. Obviously, Donald Trump lost his presidential bid there in November, and he was reported to have asked the Georgian Secretary of State,
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
The control of the Senate makes it far from certain that Joe Biden will be able to do much of his presidency, considering that the Senate still requires 60 votes to break the filibuster. This would mean that he'd need to encourage 10 Republicans in an increasingly partisan chamber to come onto his side. But I wouldn't say that all hope is lost because Joe Biden is reputed to be a deal maker, and also his simple majority is enough to pass budget reconciliation bills, which essentially allow the federal government to redistribute expenditure and revenue. On Wednesday, what was meant to be a routine rubber stamping of Joe Biden's presidency turned violent when a bunch of pro-Trump terrorists stormed the Capitol building. The incident was caused by the Save America rally, a pro-Trump protest because of his constant unfounded claims of electoral fraud. Now, there's absolutely no evidence of this whatsoever. There's been dozens of court cases which have been completely thrown out because there's not been enough evidence provided. And there's also a common sense vacuum, I think, when you claim there's an election rigged against you and then your party wins more seats in the House than they did last time. But nonetheless, some prominent Republicans, such as Senator Ted Cruz, decided to raise objections to the Electoral College count and attempt to overturn the election. But they were stopped by some previously pro-Trump Republicans, such as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever.
By 7:30 p.m, terrorists had entered the Capitol building and the Congress people had to be evacuated. Police attempted to get a handle on the situation by shooting tear gas into the rotunda and by engaging in some firefights with the terrorists as well, and the mayor of DC called for a curfew to come down. A lot of people have drawn comparisons between the BLM protests and the attack on the Capitol, saying that the police response was much more heavy-handed in the Black Lives Matter protests than it was at this attack. The president's actions in the whole affair have been heavily criticised. When the Vice President Mike Pence said that he would not step in and try and change the election results, Donald Trump said that he didn't have the courage to stand up for the country and for the Constitution. And Donald Trump further stoked the flames when he was asked, to defuse the situation and to stop the terrorists from sieging the Capitol by saying, look,
we had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order.
Trump has finally agreed to a peaceful transition of power. However, many say that this is too little, too late. There are reports that Vice President Pence is looking to invoke the 25th Amendment, which is essentially where a vice president and a president's cabinet can kick the president out of office. And they're thinking of doing this even though Donald Trump only has 13 days left in office. However, there are still some Republicans like Congressman Gosar who is still refusing to criticise Donald Trump. Gosar said that the terrorists who attacked the Capitol were much more likely to be Antifa than they were to be Trump supporters.
Right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And what's more, even after the siege had ended and the Congress had reconvened, there were still 138 House representatives who voted to reject the Pennsylvania vote count. So, thoughts on Friday. Time for my thoughts. With the lockdown, there's definitely hope, right? There's the 2 vaccines just around the corner. That's going to shorten the tunnel. We should be absolutely fine by the summer, hopefully, depending on whether the vaccines work on the new variant. What I'm really concerned about is what we saw at the Capitol, because how do we come to terms with that as a society? Obviously, it does affect Britain as well. America is, the top democracy. If America's democracy falls, and so does Britain's. But what caused it? Because if it was just racism, then obviously that's something that's always been in America's history. Why has it come out now? Is it someone stoking those fears which has caused it? Is it misinformation which has caused it? Because misinformation has been a problem in America basically forever. It bears thinking about, and it's a really tough problem. Does it, if it stems from people not being listened to, how do we take their views into concern, considering that some of their views, especially from the people who do stuff like this, some of their views are just nonsensical, like stuff like not believing COVID exists and not believing, whatever exists, and Pizzagate, rubbish like that. How do we approach people like that and get them to start believing the truth? And then once we've got them to start believing the truth, how do we move them, away from authoritarianism? And if they're conservative with a small c, that's fine. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to be if you're in a democratic society. But how do we move them away from conspiracy theory, Republicans and sieges on the Capitol and all of this stuff? So is there a solution to this problem? Is essentially what I'm beyond a lot of distress and fighting. Is there a solution? Or is this just how the world is now? Anyway, thank you for watching Thoughts on Friday. This is Wyvo. As I said at the beginning, I talk about news, current affairs, politics, history, and stuff like that. If that's your cup of tea, which I assume it is because you're here, please consider subscribing, ringing the bell, give me a little like, and all of that rubbish, and then you can know the next time I post a video. Yeah, I'm hoping to do these every Friday, but to be honest, I'm not sure how often I'll do it. And the first week I've done it, the news has sort of hit, like a peak, so I might just be working on the longer form videos. I'm working on one about the Star Wars program and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, then stick around and see what happens and all of that.